Hey everyone, today I'm here to discuss the membership report for the fourth quarter of 2022 and also to discuss the membership vote that we had a few weeks ago on how we should approach our reforestation work. We also received many interesting questions and comments that came along with the membership vote, and I've read through pretty much all of them, and in this video I'll try to address the majority of the questions that were asked because we're having a really interesting discussion on how we should approach reforestation moving forward. Now, to keep my streak alive of doing these videos in a forest, I'm going to hike in this snowy forest right here with my new snowshoes. So yeah, grab a cup of tea, get ready, and let's get started. Okay, so I hope that you can hear me well enough at this distance with this microphone. It's a bit windy today. But I hope it feels more atmospheric than it bothers your ears. So hopefully the conditions are still nice for us to go through all these questions. Okay, so let's get started with chatting about the proposal, because I think there are a few things that were not entirely clear, and it's mostly due to the way that we have presented the questions. But just a disclaimer, this is not the video where we're going to present fully our new approach for reforestation. This will come once we have the white paper sorted, and we will take the time to launch a longer form video as well to explain everything in a bit more depth. In this video, it's more a reflection on the vote and what we were trying to pitch you, to explain the proposal a little bit better, and of course also to run through the quarterly results. So the first bit of confusion that I think got right away is to which part we were applying this question about what we should do with the money that we receive for reforestation. So to make it clear, we receive your money. There's a little bit that goes out for processing fees for PayPal, Stripe, credit cards, you know, those fees before the money reaches us. And from the money that reaches us, we use 40% towards rewilding projects, which is projects such as the kelp restoration, the wetlands, this latest quarry projects, wildlife reintroductions, the invasive plant removals in the cliffs. So all these kinds of varied interventions that have as their running threads that they make the landscape wilder. Then we use another 40% for reforestation. And to date, this has meant essentially planting trees. We've committed to a certain type of intervention, not necessarily a certain outcome. And that intervention is to dig a hole in the ground and put a tree in there, and then of course create the right conditions to ensure that that tree will grow into a mature tree, and in the long run that area will become a forest. And then of course there's the 20% that go to Mossy Earth running costs. So the question in this membership vote was only about the 40% which go to reforestation, because we want to perhaps change how we use those funds to both increase forest size and health. And I think that was the next point of confusion, that essentially the way we pitched it to you and the way we asked the questions, it seemed like there was a trade-off within the methods that we were pitching to you between forest size and forest health. What we believe is that with this new approach, we will actually get bigger and healthier forests with the same amount of money. That's the key thing. If you need to take anything away, is that we really believe that with this new approach we can do that. But I'm going to go into a bit more depth and explain why we think that is the case. So let's start now by looking at the current approach, how we do things right now. So this 40% that we receive for reforestation is used to plant trees, as I mentioned. And this means that for every £5, €6, or $6.75 of membership, we have to use about £2, €2, 40 or $2.70 to plant 2 trees, which is essentially £1 a tree, €20 a tree, or $1.35 a tree. That's like how much money we actually have to use to plant a tree. And the biggest thing here is that this commitment to plant a certain number of trees, committing to the intervention instead of committing to the outcome, which is having a forest, limits us to essentially just doing that intervention, because that's what we've told you we would do. We would put a tree in the ground, and it would be that method. We wouldn't fence an area to let trees regenerate. We wouldn't seed the tree. We would plant the tree. And the key thing is here, when we're looking at $1.35 a tree to be planted in places like Iceland, the Carpathian, Slovakia, it's not a lot. It really just allows us to be very efficient at getting a sapling, sourcing a sapling, getting the tree planters to put it in the ground, and making sure that the area is protected in the long run. And we believe that if we ease up... Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's finish what the current approach is actually first. So the key thing here is that we are bound to plant trees, and we cannot use this budget, the reforestation budget, to do other things to improve or help grow the forest, because essentially we just don't have any more budget if we want to fulfill our commitment to you. But we've, of course, planted great forests with this method. We've planted always a native mix of trees, so we always source these ideally also from local DNA. And in some of our projects, we've now started also restoring the understory. But for that, we've brought funds from the Rewilding budget. And we feel like it would be ideal if our reforestation budget could cover all of that, because we have so many cool things that we want to do with Rewilding that sort of propping up the reforestation side of things isn't really one of them. And yeah, one of the main things to say is that we're perfectly happy to continue doing this because we're doing a good job. This is having a really nice impact. It's getting amazing native forests planted, which are really important habitat for a wide variety of species. But as I said, I think if we relax the thinking about the intervention and focus on the outcomes here, which is what do we want the most? We want large forests, as many as we can with this budget, right? And we want them to be as healthy as possible. And we think that by relaxing the requirements to use only a certain type of intervention, we can use a diversity of methods to essentially create a bigger and healthier forest within a certain time period. So, to give you an idea, if we plant a bunch of trees now, it's true that in 3 years we will have more trees in a certain location. So addressing now forest size. But if we use a diversity of methods, such as planting trees in clusters, and then once they are a bit more mature, they will regenerate the spaces between the clusters, for an instance, or fencing areas that already have existing seed banks to protect them from deer and other herbivores which might overgraze or overbrowse the trees. Or for an instance, using certain direct seeding methods in areas where that is appropriate, or even using just certain species that we've not been able to use as much because they cost too much to raise in a nursery. So there's certain species that are rare or they're harder to propagate, and it's a lot of work to get them in a nursery, and it's very expensive for us to plant them, and then we cannot plant them, or we have to plant them in very, very small amounts. So we think that essentially by relaxing the restriction to just plant trees, we're able to use this mix of interventions, I think above all the fencing, the planting in clusters, and the seeding, to get a bigger forest size. And when you would look maybe at a 5 or 10 year horizon, we would end up with a bigger forest than if we just planted the trees, essentially, because we'd be able to get a bigger area. So we'd be putting clusters and leaving a bit more space between them instead of having to plant more densely to get on with things. So yeah, I think that's maybe where there was some confusion, because we talked a lot about healthier forests, but we actually also want bigger forests, and we think that these methods are a better approach to that. And we had quite a few questions around, are these methods proven? Are you inventing something? Do you just want to plant fewer trees? No, these are very proven methods. I think a lot of organizations that are not necessarily bound to the simple plant a tree method are using them as well. And when we present the white paper to you and the more in-depth explanation about this new approach, we will certainly provide you with a wide range of scientific papers to back this up. So the evidence will be there, don't worry. So the second benefit of this approach is, of course, the healthier forest side of things. So we think that by being more efficient with our tree planting, by using this wider diversity of methods to reach a larger forest area, we're also able to generate some surplus budget which we can put into making those forests healthier. And we've had projects on this front already, but they've been rewilding projects, so making existing forests healthier or doing a little bit of work in some areas that we are planting, but it's been very limited, and we would really like to scale this up. So what does this mean? One of the things I've already mentioned is planting these rare, locally sourced species that usually would be way too expensive for us to plant at scale. So including a few more of those, because they are really important for the long-term health of the forest, but we're generally restricted to planting trees which we can produce at scale and which are really suited to that. Then this also allows us to focus perhaps on not only planting new forests, but also improving existing forests. So there's plenty of existing forests which are perhaps a bit skewed in terms of the species that they have, so they are very close to a monoculture, and we can come in and introduce a wide variety of native species to enrich them and improve the diversity of habitats that they provide. Then we can also work on the understory of the forest. These are all the bushes, the grasses, the flowers that are missing, the climbers as well, that are often missing from these forests. And we've had a project on this, and it's just a really exciting idea to me to come in, because we tend to think of a forest as just trees, but it is so much more than that. There's this whole habitat, and often these planted forests, I think Ayla, one of our biologists, had this good expression that I think a lot of people use, which is you cannot plant an ecosystem. Which means essentially that when you come in and try to plant a whole forest and plan the whole thing, it won't necessarily work. Now, often it's used to argue for natural regeneration, which I mentioned in the previous points. But in this case, what this also means is that you're ignoring all these other species that are supposed to be in that forest as well, namely all the species in the understory. And that's something that we could address with this surplus budget as well. And finally, within this health category, it's something that we've really been wanting to work for a long time, is to improve the mycorrhizal fungi in the forest. These are super important for the health and resilience of the trees. But they also provide really important functions in other parts of the ecosystem. So we'd really be keen to introduce small amounts of mycorrhizal fungi along with other kinds of fungi that should belong in that forest, to ensure that we get as complete as an ecosystem as one can get when you are planting it. Then we have a third benefit that I'm also quite excited about, and perhaps that's also why you decided to become a Mossy Earth member, which is more additionality. There's many people planting trees, and it's the plant and leave kind of mentality, which is what matters is we just get trees in the ground. And people tend to lose the sort of the big picture, what we are trying to do, right? We are trying to bring back these ecosystems. It's not just about carbon and creating these vast monoculture forests which are not so resilient to disease, which aren't so good for other wildlife, isn't ideal, and it's kind of boring as well. And in the side of the forest side of things, I've recently was chatting with a biologist who mentioned to me a report that shows that essentially so many companies and governments are using tree planting as their solution to essentially reduce their carbon footprint, that we're already overcommitted until 2050 when it comes to tree planting. So these governments are so lazy, governments and industry are so lazy in terms of finding solutions to reduce their footprint. They say, we'll just plant a bunch of trees. The commitment to plant all those trees is already more than we have space available for. So that tells you how much we've gone a bit mad with the tree planting side of things and lost sight of, in my opinion, what we really should be trying to do, which is creating forests for carbon, of course, but creating forests for habitat. And I think that's, really crucial. So with those three big benefits in mind, the increased forest size, the increased forest health, and the additionality, we've decided to put this to a vote for you to have an opinion on, and to say that it would pass if we would get more than 70% of votes. And I think now we can start running through the details and the results of the vote, and then also through some of the questions that you asked about these new methods. So for this vote, we received 1,414 responses. Now, perhaps we had a bit of a too short deadline. We set a 72-hour deadline, and some people mentioned that, oh yeah, I submitted it after the deadline. We tried to count those votes too, because I essentially got the data from Diogo a few days ago, so we tried to count essentially most of the votes that we've received up to about January 18th or something like that. So yeah, ideally next time we're able to warn you a little bit more in advance, so that everybody can submit their vote and is not rushed into, because I know you got much better things to do, so we don't want to rush you into this. And yeah, next time we'll try to give you a bit more warning. But we got 1,414 votes, of which 1,386 were valid email addresses, so they were matched to members, and 28 were invalid. So that is 98%. There were also a few concerns around the security of the vote. Just adding an email address didn't feel very secure to many people. So we might have to look into that. Probably not for the next vote, to be honest, as we don't have a lot of capacity to work on these kinds of things. But maybe for the one after that. So, but thank you for raising that concern, because I think it is true. It's a bit of a simple voting system, let's say so. So the first question was whether the logic of our proposal was clear and if you agreed with our thinking. And 1,321 of you agreed that it was clear. 16 said it was clear but disagreed. 29 had a comment to add, and 15 said the logic is not clear, and then we had a few blanks as well. So that is a 95.3% yes, it's clear and I agree with your thinking. And that is positive. I mean, I hope that we explained things well. Some people mentioned that the questionnaire was a bit biased. And you are right, it is biased, because we have bias towards this new thing that we want to do. So we're trying to convince you. But I think there is some responsibility for us to present a bit more of the cons as well, or perhaps some of the pitfalls that this new method might bring. So we're definitely going to look into that for the white paper. So don't worry about that, because that was a comment I read a few times. Then there was a question around, should we continue this transition process by drafting a white paper for you to vote on? And we had 1,254 people vote yes, and 121 vote no, and then 11 blanks. So that is a 90% in favor of continuing the process. And here it was interesting. So there's a difference between these two numbers. So some people agree, but they don't think we should go through this whole process. And then I sort of tried to understand this, and I went and read through, as I said, pretty much most or all of the comments. And a lot of people were saying, you're the experts, we trust you, and we don't need a white paper, we don't need this whole explanation or this vote, just get on with it, don't waste your time with this, with all this communication around that. And I think that's fair, I understand that, but on our side, refining our thinking will be a very useful exercise as well. And for us, it's also really important that you're on board with what we are doing, and that you understand clearly what we are doing, and perhaps that is also something that is valuable from almost an educational standpoint, that we are able to better explain these methods and these ideas, and that perhaps when you're somewhere in your local area and you would be participating in a reforestation project there, you would bring some of these ideas there too. So there's a bit of an added value in that. So we believe the white paper is not a waste of time, don't worry about that, but we appreciate the thought, really we do. And then I must say we screwed it up with this next question, because we asked you whether the health of the forest is more important than forest size. How strongly do you agree with that statement? And here, this was a dumb move, because it made it seem like what we've been pitching you is that we want only to create more healthier forests and care less about the forest size. We were just curious to understand a little bit whether this thought of forest health resonated with you. But it was a mistake, because I think it confused a lot of people. On average, so we had an average score of 8 here. You can see the distribution on screen. 8 is what I voted on actually as well, because I wouldn't vote a 10. We need large forests, but I do think that we have so many large forests with no life that I would really put it sort of towards an 8. So it's funny to see that it ended up there for most people too. Yeah, not much to add on here. It's really interesting. I would expect our members to be more attuned to this idea of healthy ecosystems, given that most of the work that brings new members in these days are the rewilding projects that we are putting on places like YouTube. So stuff like the kelp restoration or the wetlands aren't very simple projects. They're quite nuanced. So I expect that you, our members have some understanding of ecosystem health and not just huge monoculture forests. And yeah, then in between this we had a few questions where we allowed people to submit, first to comment a bit on the voting process, and then to submit their questions for me to answer in this video. So now I will be going through the questions that were submitted about the proposal and also about the voting process. Now, first, let me start, of course, with all the I really read most of the things that were submitted. It took me quite a few hours, and maybe we have to change it next time, because if double the amount of people reply next time, I don't think I'll be able to keep up. But it was really interesting because, yeah, you all had a lot to say, and it was very interesting to see your thinking, and I think it helps really drive the way that we explain things and approach our projects. So the first category, I tried to categorize all of these replies. I went through more than 1,400 comments, so I had to categorize them, so I won't be reading any comments directly. And the first category that I have here are these sort of thank you / this is great kind of comments, and we really appreciate those. So there are a lot of people saying they're happy with the level of transparency in these projects. People saying that, so some of you are saying that it's good to think, that we keep sort of going back and thinking about the efficiency of our projects, and that's something that I'm really happy with as well, and it's probably one of the main reasons I'm excited about this new change in the reforestation side of things. Then there are people who really love the vote, so they feel like we are treating our members a bit more like shareholders in a company, so that you get to have a say on things actually. And I hope that's really how you feel, because I would like that to continue and to improve moving forward, because I think that would be really fun way of doing rewilding, that everybody feels involved, because we want to try to increase the involvement, because this means that you really buy into the ideas, and perhaps that you will apply them more in your local area, and that we will all together as a group be able to have a bigger impact on the landscape. Then we had some people saying that they love the transparency, but were perhaps concerned that it takes up too many resources. Currently it takes a bit of effort, of course. I mean, I'm here talking to you, I've had to prepare for this video, we had people work on the report and so on, but what Mossy Earth does is essentially receive money, handle all of this and put it into really useful projects, whether run by us or by other people, and then essentially convey the results of these projects to you. And that part is one of the 3 pillars of this, right? So we cannot really neglect that. So if we can't neglect that, we might as well do as best a job as we can to convey this information to you. Other people mentioned they were very connected to the projects, which is really great. Other people were happy about this new thinking because it improved the impact per euro, dollar, or pound, and so this bang for your buck idea. Then let's get into more like the nitty-gritty of things. So some people now looking at the vote logistics, essentially. A lot of people thought the voting process was logical and it was quite seamless, but some people also had complaints about how things will run, which I'll try to answer here. So, of course, I mentioned already some people missed the deadline. I think that's something that we will address for the next one, give you a bit more time, maybe put it in the calendar so that you're aware when this vote's going to come up. And then there are some people saying that we're giving too much power to the people, which is, yeah, I think we would not pitch something to you that we wouldn't want to do ourselves and that our biologists aren't excited to do. If anything, we're trying to get you on board to do the things that we want to do. Yeah, it's more of an idea that we're excited about, and that we want to change the terms of the membership effectively. So it needs you to say yes, right? Some people saying you're the experts, we trust you, again, don't bother with these processes. I think there's many organizations that don't bother with these processes. We want to bother with these processes, so I think we can spend a bit of time on them. Our biologists are doing their work. They're not concerned about this. I'm wasting my time on this, otherwise I'd be making YouTube videos. So it's okay to waste my time on this. I think it's a great way to spend my time, actually. Again, people mentioned they voted no because they didn't want us wasting time on white papers. And then there was a final question saying, will we offer many different options when it comes to the final vote? So some people felt it was a bit like, yes, buy into all of these ideas, or no, buy into that, because some people disagreed with different parts of the proposal. So I think, yes, we'll try to ask you as many questions as possible for the next one, just to gauge people's opinion on different kinds of interventions. Okay, so now let's look at the feedback that you had for us when it comes to the proposal. And one of the things that quite a few people mentioned was that the questionnaire felt a bit one-sided. I've already addressed this, saying that yes, we are biased, because that's the new idea that we have. And I in the white paper and in the upcoming video, we will try to provide a bit more of the pros and cons as well of the new way that we are pitching things to you. But I think we'll go through some of the issues here, and you'll get an idea as to why we think like that. I'm sorry, I'm going to be scrolling with my nose because the temperature is dropping. It's freezing right now, and yeah, I don't want to take my hands out of the gloves. So one of the categories that we had for the questions about the proposal was, why are we changing things? Aren't we happy with our current forests? We are very happy with our current forests, but we could be happier. We would like to do a more complete job, and also we would like to be able to reach a larger forest size, and that is simply not possible by simply focusing on one type of intervention. So we are happy, but we could be happier, and that's why we're proposing a change to you. Another point was whether we would give the option for some people to simply continue focusing on the planting. I think that's an idea we could explore. I don't know if it's the greatest idea to generate more confusion, let's say so that some people have to do it one way, some people have to do it another way. It's raining. So I waited about 30 minutes for the rain and the snow to clear, but it doesn't seem to be letting up, and I can't have my camera get all this water on it. So I'm going to head back inside and continue going through the proposal and all the questions and comments you had about it with a warm cup of tea. And yeah, this is what happens when you film outdoors. Sometimes you have to contend with the elements. So I'm gonna head back and then we'll continue. Okay, so now that I'm back inside and out of the rain, we can continue going through your comments about the proposal. And the next point I have here was that some people mentioned that we could have essentially just shown all of this in a video and explained it a bit how we do in our project videos, and it would have been easier to understand. And I agree, we've had this discussion internally. Perhaps in the future we'll try to make a few short videos to inform people about the changes we want to make. But this time we thought it'd be really important for people to read through things just before they voted, so that there wasn't a scenario where they were voting on something without reading it. And yeah, we felt that was a bit important, so I hope it was okay. And that video with the more in-depth explanation will be coming in a few months when we actually release the white paper and the final vote. So by then we will have a proper video for you. So then I would like to move into another category of comments about the proposal, which I'll call the confusion category, because I think the way we presented things, we might have generated a bit of confusion, and some of the comments reflected that, so I want to clear up a few things. So one of the points was that essentially people thought we were saying we will stop planting trees. The majority of our reforestation work will still be tree planting. It's just we would like to diversify it with additional types of interventions so that we can ensure that we get, as I mentioned before, a larger forest area and a healthier forest by the end of the whole process. But yeah, to be clear, we are still going to be planting trees. There was another question which was, again, due to confusion around rewilding, so saying, oh, are you going to stop all the work that's not related to reforestation? This is just about the 40% relating to reforestation. Our rewilding projects have their own track, and they have 40% of the impact budget, or of the total budget, so 50% of the impact budget, and yeah, they're their own thing, so they don't mix with this. Then some people mentioned that, you know, the forest size was also important. Again, this is something that I've already touched on. Forest size is really important to us as well, and we believe that we can increase forest size with these new methods. Some people mentioned that perhaps it would be a smart way, perhaps it would be smart to essentially create a lot of very large forests, and over time their health will increase on their own, so that we don't have to do anything. And I partially agree with that. Some people refer to it as putting the scaffolding in, and then, you know, you just let things sort of build from there. But I think that with a little bit more effort, we can accelerate that process quite a bit. And when we're talking about the biodiversity crisis that we have right now, I think all these moments are precious and we need to get on with things. So I think it's important to do things right as fast as possible. So if it doesn't cost that much more, why not just do it? Then some people mentioned that it was strange that we didn't include the cost of the land in any of this. If we had to buy all the land where we planted trees, it would be practically impossible to do this work. So we rely on partnerships with landowners, usually private entities, either organizations or individual landowners. Yeah, that's the way we are able to plant the trees without having to pay for the land itself. Then there's a question around whether we needed to also have wildlife reintroductions to make these forests complete. Some of them do. That's part of the rewilding side of things, of course, and there we do a variety of wildlife reintroductions. So it's a really important component of conservation and rewilding in general to reintroduce missing species when the conditions are right, of course. So the next category within these comments on the proposal is sort of like support and advice for us. So I'll run through those now. So some people mentioned that they didn't sign up for tree planting, but to create wilderness, so that this new direction is really good for them. And I agree, I'm here to create wilderness and not just to sign up to, you know, to just do a certain type of intervention. So I'm really excited to see people mention that as well. A lot of people saying they care about impacts, not trees, loving native trees and healthy forests. Some people mentioned it would be really cool if some of these reforestation projects could also focus on connecting different healthy or high quality forests by creating these corridors between forests. And I think that's a very interesting idea, and it's really important from a rewilding perspective to try to create connectivity between different nature areas. A lot of people mentioned they loved the focus on fungi, and I think that's been something that a lot of members have mentioned to us over time, and I really think that is something that we hope to deliver on soon with some projects, hopefully in 2023. Some people mentioned that they would like even more emphasis on other components of the understory, such as the shrubs and the bushes and the flowers, because they felt that it was something really neglected, so that a portion of the reforestation budget shouldn't necessarily go to creating forests, but improving existing forests where that understory is missing. And we have a project like this, but currently we're doing with our rewilding budget. It could be feasible that we include it in sort of a forest improvement budget within our reforestation side of things. So I think that would be a good way to spend this money, but probably not a large portion of it, if that makes sense. And then, yeah, there was some points around ensuring that we include local communities in these projects. I think that is really crucial to have the people around these forests buy into the idea This applies to any rewilding project, really. If you don't have people local to the area excited about the project, your project will not succeed. I think that's a very basic thing to have in a project, really, local community buy-in. And yeah, then I think some people also mentioned that they plant trees with other organizations. So I think when you're a Mossy Earth member, it doesn't mean you're not a member of other similar, well, not similar, we do our own rewilding thing, but other organizations that plant trees. And some people are saying, yeah, I plant a lot of trees through this. They do fruit forests in Africa, do this, mangroves in Thailand, and so on. So you guys focus on the rewilding side of things, and that's your unique angle. And some people were saying, hey, you know, that's what I signed up for. So I thought that was also an interesting piece of feedback, which I agree with as well. Then someone asked around whether these ideas have been applied at scale. So a lot of them have, yes. And I think we will be including examples in our white paper to ensure that it's complete and that you're able to see some clear examples of where these ideas have been applied successfully in the past. Then we had a question around which method captures more carbon in the short term and the long term. I'd say probably short term, just planting trees will capture more carbon, and probably long term, being more strategic, how you spend your resources will capture more carbon in the long term. So yeah, I think the new approach that we are suggesting is a better long-term alternative. And yeah, it has the downside that in the short term, say, 5 years, it'll capture a lot less carbon. Or not a lot less, but a bit less carbon. Then the next sort of cluster of comments that I read were around the downsides and the risk. So I think that's very valid. So here I mean essentially that we didn't mention many of the downsides. And that was, as I explained earlier, because we are really excited about this. We focused really on explaining to you why we view the positives in this, but we should have included a more clear pros and cons list. This will be provided again with the white paper and with the final vote. But some of the questions were, what are the downsides? And I think the downsides are a lot to do with metrication. So how do you measure this? And that's something that we're going to touch on in a little bit. And the fact that, not everything within these interventions is as easy to measure and to explain to members and to communicate. So some people were quite worried that this would be off-putting to new members and that would in some way stall Mossy Earth's growth. And I think that is a very reasonable thing to say. And we are wary of that as well, because tree planting is such a clear thing to do, right? You put a tree, you've planted one tree, everybody understands the concept of what a tree is, it grows, and then it makes a forest, and a forest is where wild things live. So it's a really clear thing that you're giving people, and you can put a number like we do in our account with the number of trees that you've planted. And that's something that, for instance, we can't do with some of our other projects, which are not as easily measurable, such as a certain amount of kelp that you've put in the ocean, or the 1/100th of a wildlife reintroduction that you've contributed to. It's really hard to cut it down into numbers that make sense for people. So I also view that as a risk. I think to address that point, we will probably look at a new kind of metric, and that metric, I feel, will probably be forest area. I don't think we can escape something clear like that. So we might look at ways where we can essentially commit to a certain amount of forest size. But I think we have to think about this, like what that amount will be, and maybe it'll take some time to understand exactly how much we would like to commit to for that proportion of the budget. So it's hard to just come up with a number. And then the other side of that is that the density at which you plant and the density of the forests in different places, say a forest in Iceland or a forest in Romania, they have different densities. So just committing to a certain forest size is complicated, because for one you have to do a lot more than the other. And I think that is also something which can be a bit tricky. So we'd probably be telling you more that we've generated this much forest in this area for you, just like we do in a rewilding project. And that might be the way we would get around that risk. Then some people mentioned that they didn't like the idea of fencing. Fencing is also something that biologists and conservation biologists are wary of, because of course you're excluding some of the wildlife from an area. So the logic behind fencing is usually that there is an excessive amount of herbivores in the area. So for instance, in the case of Scotland, most of Scotland has something like 25 deer per square kilometer, and it should realistically have somewhere around 3. So all the small saplings that are trying to grow, they are overbrowsed. And when you fence them in, some of the old seeds and some of the existing saplings will naturally start growing. So all you need to do really is put down a fence and you start having a forest. But you are then excluding the deer from a place that, you know, they should also be allowed to be. So it's a really tricky trade-off, and one has to be careful to make sure that these fences are adequate for other wildlife as well, so that you only exclude, let's say, the wildlife that is really harming the growth of this forest. In the case of Iceland, for instance, it's not wildlife really; it's just sheep, because sheep are left in the highlands to graze, and they're allowed to roam. So you actually have to fence your forest in instead of the sheep being fenced in. So you're not even trying to keep some wildlife out, but just sheep. And I think for us that's a pretty important point, where it's just a domestic animal that we're trying to leave out. Then some people mentioned that they would rather not see Mossy Earth go down the route of protecting existing forests, because they felt it was a bit of a trap, right? Like, how do you prove that this forest is going to be cut? And I agree with that to some extent. I think there is good work being done to protect forests, and I think it's important work that can be efficient, but I agree with the point that it's really hard to prove, and I don't think Mossy Earth will go down that route. And if we do protect or help somehow support the protection of something, it will be of a smaller proportion. Essentially, it won't be a large proportion of our budget. So it would be something that you would understand very clearly what is going on, and that the value would be really obvious. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but I think it's a really good point. And then, yeah, some people mentioned that they preferred the tried and true methods, putting a tree in the ground, you get a forest. Agreed. But I think a lot of these other methods are also tried and true, and we hope to show that to you with the white paper. And finally, the last cluster of feedback that I got, or that we got for the proposal, was around evidence. So people felt that it was really light on evidence to make a decision. And I agree. Essentially, we just wanted to put a bit of a feeler out there. That's what this vote was to see if you were open to the idea and you thought it would potentially be okay. And we didn't include any links to papers backing any of the claims that we were making. Perhaps it would have been logical to include them at this stage, but we thought it'd be smart to just keep it as lean as possible for now. So that was our thinking. The next stage will be much heavier on proof, and I think there you can expect much more from us to back up our claims with some actual peer-reviewed scientific papers. So that mostly wraps things up for the proposal side of things. I'm sure there'll be many more questions to cover on this, but I hope I've touched on some of the more confusing points, and that I've laid the foundation for when the white paper comes. Things will be a bit more streamlined and clearer for you to understand. So the next step in our little chat here would be to run through the membership report. So I want to quickly run through some of the numbers. I'll just be flicking through the pages. The report is really beautiful. I think you should download it from the email that we've sent you. We'll also add it to the description here on the YouTube video, so you can take a look. Ria's done a really great job illustrating it, and Bob's done a really good job, or Diogo's done a really good job compiling the numbers. So yeah, you should definitely take a look. I think it's good reading, and I think it's a good explanation of what we've been up to. So for the report, as I mentioned last time, the cover, you get the big picture of how things have developed. So we grew by 1,737 members in the fourth quarter of 2022. So that is 34% growth. I think that's really great. It's really nice progress. it's going to be a lot more momentum for this year. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. And together with all our members, essentially, we raised £245,000, which is a record for us, I think. And 80% of this, of course, will be used to fund our rewilding and reforestation efforts. So that's £196,000. And 20% will be used to cover Mossy Earth's running costs, which is £49,000. So in the second page of the report, we break down a little bit more this growth by month so that you can visualize it a little bit better. As you can see, we had a big spike in December. That was mostly caused by one of our videos doing really well on YouTube as usual, but also because of the gifts. So around Christmas, we always kind of try to make you aware that we have these gifts. So if you would like to gift a Mossy Earth membership for a year to someone, then yeah, it just makes for a really cool Christmas gift. And we had a lot of people do that. So last year we had something around £4,400 in gifts, which isn't a lot. And this year we had £28,986, which is a lot more. So that is really cool to see, and nice to see that it's also an additional way to reach people. And yeah, I hope for those of you who bought this as a gift that people enjoyed it, and yeah, really appreciate it. Because it helps move things forward for us, and it also helps us reach a new audience that weren't aware of Mossy Earth before, right? So from page 3 onward, we go into a bit more depth how we calculate our monthly impact budget. And we have to do this because we have members with yearly memberships, and we try to distribute the funds by the 12 months after they've signed up, so that essentially the amount, projects that you see in your account match actually what we are spending your money on. So if you just joined and we spent all that money right away on the one project that we're funding that month, then you wouldn't have your money distributed by all our different projects. And we think that's important. That's one thing. Then we also have gifts, extra contributions, a variety of different factors that means we have to essentially calculate our monthly impact budget with some interesting maths. I went into a lot of detail last time in the Q3 video that I made. So if you want to understand a little bit better how we calculate these numbers, you can go there. In the report, you'll essentially be able to see them on this page. And it explains clearly how these numbers are calculated and what they mean. But by the end of all of this, the number that you need to retain is that we have a usable membership revenue for the fourth quarter of 2022 of around £179,000, of which 80% will go to impact, which is £143,000. And we've already allocated it to different buckets, if you will. Around 14% will be used for time spent for staff costs associated with the project, so things, so expenses such as biologists or other consultants that need to work on these projects. 32% goes directly into the rewilding projects, and 54% is being used for the tree planting side of things, to plant 77,000 trees. Now, as you will notice, this isn't yet the 40% split that we are aiming for, because currently tree planting still takes a bit of that rewilding budget, or if we first decide on how much budget we have to allocate to the reforestation side of things, and then the leftover is currently going towards the rewilding side. And the proposal and the whole thing that we are discussing here is part of changing that, so that we can essentially feel a bit more confident in putting 40% towards rewilding and 40% towards reforestation, and one doesn't sort of borrow from the other, if that makes sense. Then essentially when we look at the final cash to impact, that is £152,000, and that is 80.39% of the total. So it's slightly above, or well, really just 0.39% above of what we've committed, which is 80%. So that's those are the numbers to impact. So again, probably the best you can do is read through the report a little bit. As I mentioned, it's beautifully illustrated by Ria and wonderfully explained by Diogo, so you should just go and have a read, and I think things will make a little bit more sense when you're reading through this report. Then what we also have here, which is new and a bit more interesting, is how we are going to be spending these rewilding budgets. So the list here is not the complete list of everything that we're going to be spending on next year, otherwise we wouldn't be spending much, but it's the things that we've already committed to. So we can already tell you where some of this budget will go. And I think it's really exciting to see some of these projects starting to scale up. So the first project on this list is really the scale-up moment for it, which is the kelp. We've done various trials, we've set up a nursery, we have this whole partnership put in place to get this moving. And we're going to spend, next year we're going to spend £51,000 to really scale it up. And the money will be spent in paying for, staff time at the nursery, and of course the consumables for the nursery as well, so that we can keep producing the green gravel. And the money will also be used to deploy and monitor the kelp in different points in the Portuguese coast. So this will require some diving, it will require boats, etc. So those £51,000 are there to start scaling up that project and see how it behaves once we start adding more volume. Then we have £7,000 allocated to the continuation of our water vole reintroduction project. So this is our project in Cornwall where we are reintroducing water voles. And essentially this budget is just for the second release. So that involves the transport and the setting up of the pens in the release area, and of course the release itself. Then we have around £15,000 for the continuation of our red kite reintroduction. Once again, staff costs, materials, and any other bits and bobs associated with travel or the monitoring of any tagged kites as well. And then we have around £2,800 already assigned to the snail species rescue. So this is the project where we are trying to save 4 species of snail that are pretty much going extinct in the Desertas Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. And this money will essentially just be used for the field work. So essentially to allow staff to access certain areas to continue monitoring the field conditions and provide this data to the zoos which are now breeding the snails. And that data is really important because if the zoos are able to create the perfect conditions for the snails, but that isn't always ideal because the snails might grow too soft. They need the conditions that they used to live in, so that once they are reintroduced, they feel right at home and things work out great for them and that population really grows. And the other bit of that budget is still being used to create rope access to some of the cliffs where we are still searching for that 4th species of snail that we haven't yet managed to get enough numbers to save it, to put it into a breeding program. So we're still going at that, and there'll be more costs associated with this project, but this is the budget that's assigned right now. Then we have £17,000 associated with restoring wetlands. This is a continuation of our various projects to restore wetlands in the Danube. I think all of you are aware with how it works, and it's essentially for the excavation of channels and to restore areas so that they can be flooded when the flood time comes. And the last one on this list are £35,000 for this quarry project. We released a video recently. It's essentially staff time, machinery rental, and any other costs associated with the earth movements or the monitoring of the area. And yeah, the rest of this page essentially outlines how we want to be ideally spending, what's the philosophy behind our budgets. And as I mentioned before, we're trying to spend around 15% in incubator type projects. So these are innovative projects that aim to develop and test interventions that will restore ecosystems at scale. Then we have around 15% for conservation, which is projects which focus on protecting or helping restore a certain population. So they're not necessarily looking at an ecosystem-wide problem. They're more looking at how can we save one particular species. And then we have these ecosystem-wide projects which take up 70% of our rewilding budget. So essentially these are projects which focus on an ecosystem function to impact a whole process and or function in the ecosystem and unlock a cascade of positive change. So that's really the tried and tested, the proven good stuff that is really wide. But we really like this diversity, and this is the philosophy that we will be pursuing for this coming year, so we're sticking to it. We think it's a right balance, and we hope that by the end of the year our budgets will line up mostly along these lines. In this next section, we talk a bit more about how we are approaching this process of improving the cost effectiveness of our projects. And we have roughly three big clusters or three different steps that we are taking in 2023. So one of them that our biologists are really excited about is a partnership with conservation evidence. So this is a project, I believe, that is based in Cambridge and that aims to provide a free, authoritative information resource designed to support decisions about how to maintain and restore global biodiversity. So we think that this partnership will help empower our team to better use evidence to improve the outcomes of our projects. So a project is only as good as the rationale, the thinking, the evidence, and the measurements that we take in terms of the results that we achieve. Otherwise, we're just shooting in the dark. And I think that's something that has happened too much in the conservation or rewilding world, where people just guess what might be the right intervention instead of sticking to this, essentially what is the scientific method for rewilding and conservation. Then we also think that this will improve the way that we report costing to sort of help us track better the cost effectiveness of our projects, and also to provide this data to other organizations which might want to do similar projects so that they understand the costing structure of what is involved in certain projects. And finally, we also think this partnership will allow us to create evidence for certain techniques, and this evidence again will be useful for a wide range of people. And we can also tap into the evidence that others are generating, because this means that we're not just having the interventions themselves. By pioneering something or by learning some particular insight, we're also generating knowledge which can then be used by others, and that is a form of impact in itself. So we're really excited about this conservation evidence partnership. Then the second step we're taking in 2023 for the cost effectiveness is to have a scientific board of advisors. So this has been a long time in the making. So we're really excited to essentially get a group of external advisors to come in and help us make key decisions and question how we do things on a regular basis, so that we essentially can have these bigger discussions around strategy and how we spend our budgets. And I think our biologists will really benefit from this. I certainly try to always get advice for any decisions that I make as well. And finally, that's something that also our biology team has been really busy with, is improving the project selection and design process. So we've had a very thorough project selection process in place for a few years now. But this is something that we want to, continuously refine. And I think at this stage, where we are growing much faster than we were before, our processes have to be put in place so that our budgets continue to be as efficient as they've been so far. And perhaps we can also find additional ways for which essentially we are able to continue applying the efficiency that we have with, let's say, a 3,000 or a 10,000 pound project to something like a 50, a 100,000 pound or a 500,000 pound project. And that we think that we will achieve this essentially by just ensuring that our design of the project is really solid and well thought through from the ground up. So that's something that I hope to make a video about this year as well. So I think you'll get quite a bit of information on this in the coming months. And then the last bit of the report is essentially just the appendix with some additional definitions and also the explanation of this quarter's expenses. As you saw, this quarter we didn't spend much on projects. And that is because we've been very inwardly focused on planning how we are going to spend the money. It doesn't change. So these two numbers don't add up always, right? Like the money that we've allocated towards impact and the money that we've spent. They will in the long run, but in the short term they don't, because right now we are thinking about how we are spending that money and we don't want to take wrong steps. That's, again, a really important part of this whole process, is to ensure that every single bit, so every single project that we sign up to, we are happy with. But this year we're going to be scaling this up. So I think in the next quarter and the one after that, you should be seeing a lot more expenses in this part of the report. And now, before it gets dark, I want to run through some of the questions that you've submitted. As I mentioned, we had hundreds of, well, actually thousands of comments and questions. And for this one, I decided not to organize them in clusters, but more to just try to answer the questions as they were. So I've selected a bit of a random mix here, and I'll try to answer them as fast as I can so that we can try to go through a lot of questions in one go. So, how much is a healthier forest more impactful than a basic one? I think a lot. I think this is also measurable to some degree by the amount of biodiversity that lives in those forests. And I think that's something, again, I don't want to push everything into the white paper, but something that we will try to explain to you when we draft the next stage of this proposal. What does the long term of the projects and partnerships look like? So the long term is really important to us. If any project that we have needs to have a long-term rationale associated with it. So often what I think our members have raised as a very valid question is, will that area be protected? Is the land, who owns the land? And those questions are really important. Broadly speaking, the majority of our work is done in private land that's owned by foundations, which have certain covenants that they have to use the land for conservation and rewilding. And sometimes we also work in communal land, protected land. And there we work with agreements with various entities. I think the long term of our projects is quite secure. I'm quite confident in the way that we've organized things. I think we could benefit from explaining it a bit better as well. But for now, I must say that it's one of the things that I'm not too concerned about, because I feel like the partnerships that we have in place are really, really solid. Then someone was asking whether this proposed change would be worked into the 2023 plan. Ideally, yes. We would like to change direction after this has been approved by our members, but we want to make sure that our thinking is good for ourselves and that you agree with our thinking. As I mentioned before, I think it's really important for you to understand where we're taking things. Then someone asked whether the Your Trees section in the account will be completely phased out. This is a question we're still asking ourselves, because effectively we are still going to be planting trees, but there'll be, if the changes go through, but there'll be so much more to it as well that it doesn't necessarily fit in a top line metric on your account. So we have to really start thinking, how can we report all the impact, both of the rewilding and the different approaches on the reforestation side of things? This is a big question for us on how we will design the membership accounts to, essentially it's a user interface that is there to reflect as best as possible what we spend the money on. And if we could say, you've contributed to 15 flowers here and 5 bushes there, we would, but not everything is measurable. We're dealing with huge areas and nature restoring itself, right? So we essentially have to more talk about the interventions that we are implementing. And I think there we could take a few steps to be a lot more granular so that you can see in a lot more detail how we are spending that money. So yeah, will your trees be completely phased out? I'm not sure yet. We'll probably always keep counting the trees that we plant and telling you how many trees you are planting with your money, but hopefully we can add a bit more information and a bit more impact to all of that as well. Then the next question I have here is, how do we ensure that we're choosing the correct native plants, trees, and fungi for a certain area? And can you provide details on how you research this? I'm not a conservation biologist. I'm not the one who decides on these species, so perhaps I should bring a biologist for this conversation next time. But essentially we look at what this is quite studied in many of the areas we work in, but we also look at existing old growth forests in an area and at the species mix in those areas. And recently we went through this exercise to try to pick some species that we want to plant in Iceland, and we looked at species in the same latitude in very similar conditions in Scandinavia, for instance, because forests have been gone for so long in Iceland that the species mix could be slightly different from what is currently native there. So we tried to be really scientific about it, and I think for each project we include a justification in the project page as to why we picked those species. But I think that's a really good point that we should include clearly for each project how we really got to that mix. And then in terms of the local DNA, when we can, we get the native trees that are from that specific area. That's also an important component of our work, but you don't always get that opportunity. The next question I have here is someone asking, well, I'm not clear on what/how you are contributing. Manpower, materials, funding to local organizations, and what kind of commitment are you making to them, for how long? And, explain this a little bit. This is probably confusing because we have a variety of ways we contribute to projects, right? So some projects are fully run by our biologists. These are the ones that we're wanting to increase the amount of and scale up, which is why we've been hiring biologists. And these are projects that essentially have other partners, but we are the ones leading the project fully. One of our biologists is in charge of gathering different groups, is in charge of all the full implementation on the ground. So there, essentially, we contribute with the manpower, the materials, the funding, the knowledge, and anything else that is required. Then we have a large amount of partnerships with really great organizations, and there it varies. Often we can pay for manpower to get the work done. We can pay for materials as well. But the funding is always tied to a direct cost, not just a contribution to an organization. So in our management plans, we always have a detailed outline of how this money will be spent and exactly what it will be spent on. And you can also download the management plans from our website, so you can see yourself exactly for each project what kind of expenses we are supporting or funding. In those partnerships, we have a wide variety of ways of working. Then I have here, will you continue with the system for making decisions on projects as Mossy Earth membership increases? I've asked myself this a little bit because I spent hours and hours reading through questions and comments, and I think it's really interesting and exciting that we get so much input, because for so long we worked a little bit with a lot less input and a lot less people paying attention to our work. So it feels great, but as you've alluded to with this question, it might be unfeasible to at least read through all the comments. For the voting and this decision-making system, 100%. I would like to expand it. I think in the team we've discussed that we feel really good about it. It essentially it brings our members along with the decisions that we make. And in addition to the scientific evidence and all that reasoning, it provides sort of a third pillar of confidence for us to decides to work on a certain project. So we really would like to continue with this decision-making system, even as the membership increases. But we might change how certain questions are asked, and I think we're definitely going to think a little bit more about vote design, but it's a learning process. And actually here I have a question for you. If you've watched this far, you might be able to help me with this. How does one parse through something like 2,000 questions or comments? I thought I could perhaps give this to an AI or something like this to essentially read through all the various questions and summarize it for me, but I couldn't really come up with a good way to look at all this volume of data of people who describe such interesting and important things in their comments, and without reading every single one. And then I spent a lot of time on that. So yeah, if you have any idea, please drop it in the comments below. That would be really useful for us. Then the question, which was, which parameters will be used to measure the health of forests? I think here probably the number one thing will be diversity of species and sort of how complete the ecosystem is, but I don't want to speak out of place because, again, we've hired biologists for this. It will be very clear when we pitch the next stage of the project how we are going to try to measure and what we expect will be the additional health in these forests. Are you looking for other resources of income, like one-off sponsorships, to increase the pool of resources to scale the projects. We've worked with businesses, we still work with businesses, but in terms of one-off contributions, we feel like we're really focused on the membership because it provides us with this really simple thing to work with. But in your account, you will see that often we add projects on there for one-off contributions, and we want to keep expanding the pool of projects that can be added there for one-off contributions, and they're providing us with a really nice additional source of income for a variety of projects. So we'll definitely be expanding that, but only for existing members, not for the public, because the most important thing for us is to have members, because it gives us a very predictable budget that we know will be there the next month, and we can plan with that and commit to spending in certain ways and hire people based on that. So it makes a very big difference, and I think it would be foolish to try to change that at this stage. And then another question I have here is, will the methods to increased forest area per cash spent be in conflict with the methods to restore forest health? For example, would relying on seed banks to restore fenced off areas create a less diverse / healthy forest? I don't think so. I think different methods would allow us to do both things better. So that's why we're pitching it to you. We want more and better forests. I think that's the idea here. And then there was a question around, why do smaller plantings produce higher quality forests? I don't think they have to. I think here again is a question associated with the confusion that we've generated by asking you whether we should have whether you preferred healthier or larger forests. Of course, a smaller planted area is easier to control, so you're perhaps able to do a bit more work to ensure that it's really high quality what you've done. But as I mentioned, I think above all is planting fewer trees, but still planning for a certain forest size allows us to spend more money on forest health, which then over the long run leads to a larger and healthier forest without planting as many trees initially, and with that money essentially allowing us to work on the other species that should be there too. And then the final question that I have here is, how will you share with members the impact our donations are making towards reforestation, since we won't be able to count trees planted per month? I've addressed this question a little bit. I think forest size is probably going to be the way moving forward. We've also toyed with, or have been looking at, using satellites to track the progress of these forests, but we haven't really found a solution yet, and our oldest forests are only 5 years old, and it takes a while for satellites to start picking up on the changes in those areas. So we need to find a good way to report this to you for the long run. So those were all my questions. That was a really nice long conversation. I hope you enjoyed the ramble, and I'm sorry for changing setting and so on. I really like doing these. We will be doing these again the next quarter. If you also have some feedback on how we should approach making these videos moving forward, then please let me know in the comments as well. Should I bring an extra person in? Should we, things like that. Don't perhaps have a biologist here with me always or something like this. I'm trying to think also of ways we can improve this without necessarily improving too much or spending too much extra effort, so that we're also not wasting time on this. But yeah, I really enjoy this. I really appreciate you if you've watched so far. And yeah, I'll see you again for another video like this in 3 or 4 months' time. And in the meantime, thank you very much for being a Mossy Earth member. And until next time. Cheers!